Hello and welcome into Dental Profits webinar series, where we come to you live each week talking about the business of your business. It's all about happier clients, better results, making more money, and having you enjoy the ride. Today, we're going to talk about why your patients buy. Hi folks, I'm Sean Crabtree. My company's called the Crabtree Group, and for the last 20 years I've worked closely with dentists and dental teams all over North America, from Vancouver, British Columbia to Barbados, and from Nassau in the Bahamas all the way to the Great Lakes. And so this show each week is about the business of your dental business. I always like to say it's about helping you have happier patients, better results, making more money, and I want you to enjoy the ride. So, one of the biggest challenges, or one of the biggest requests that we hear on a regular basis is, Sean, how do I increase my treatment acceptance? You know, it's a great question, but probably a better question is, how do I need to be thinking so that I can implement the things that are going to help me increase my treatment acceptance? And let me tell you what I mean by that. The how to do it is simply a process. Yes, there are steps. Yes, you have to have your team involved. Everybody has to be on board. But before you can implement those things, you have to really analyze why your patients buy, and you've got to get in touch with what that reasoning is so that you can match it. So, let me start with a question to you. Why do your patients buy? I can tell you, when I've asked that question, to groups large and small over the last 20 years, the biggest word I get is this word called education. Education. Our patients buy from us because we spend a great deal of time educating them. And we really do a great job of focusing our efforts on educating our patients. Analyze that. Let me ask you a question. Do your patients really buy because you educate them? Think about that for a second. Let me take you to a different place. Let's say we're not even talking about dentistry. Let's say we're talking about you as a consumer. Is there anything that you really buy because of your education on the product? Think about something that you know nothing about. Okay? I don't know, for me that's cars. I know nothing about engines, right? You know, if I go to a mechanic and he tells me that I have this, and this wrong, and then he educates me on what could happen if I don't get it replaced or whatever, am I really going to buy it because I'm educated? Take a different example. If you really believe that it's about education, then let me ask you this. Do you believe that people in healthcare are educated about the dangers of smoking? If the answer is yes, you believe that people in healthcare are educated about the dangers of smoking, then the obvious destination for that would be nobody in healthcare would ever smoke because they're educated about the dangers, right? Do you believe that people in healthcare are educated on the dangers of bad eating habits, right? Obesity, right? Things like that. Well, if you believe that they're educated, then the natural destination of that is nobody in healthcare would have eating challenges or weight challenges, right? The point is, it's not about education. Education is not what's going to help your treatment acceptance. And you got to get that clear in your mind. Well, what is it then? If it's not education, then what the heck is it? Well, it's value. The bottom line is, you and I and all of us buy everything based on our individual perception of the value of it. In psychology, if you think about the old days, back when you were in school and you learned about psychology, you learned about something called the pleasure and the pain principle, right? All human motivation is revolving around the ability to get out of some sort of pain physical pain, emotional pain, whatever, and get into some sort of pleasure. Physical pain, physical pleasure, emotional pleasure, whatever it is. That has a lot to do with value as well. It's an emotional thing. All of this is emotional. Now, education is something totally different. And so if you're a hygienist, and by the way, if you're a hygienist or a doctor and you're listening to this, or if you're an assistant or whatever role it is that you play in the dental office, if you think that you're doing a great job by educating your patients and that's what's going to have them make a decision to buy, listen, I was right there with you, okay? I absolutely used to believe that. And I've been a people person and I've been in sales my entire life. Even when I was a kid, I've always been in sales. And I always thought that education was the key. This was a hard thing for me to get over as well. But if you connect the dots and if you think about some of the examples that we just talked about, like smoking and eating and so forth, you really come to realize education is not the key. It's not education. It's creating value. More specifically, emotional value. That is the key. Now, before you can get into a concept of how to implement those things, before you can walk through the processes and the systems about how to do that, you got to get clear in your own mind about where it is that you're trying to go. And where it is that you're trying to go is not educating your patients. It's actually creating value. Okay, if you're clear about that, if you're with me on this thing, if you're agreeing with me. Now, if you don't, I'm sure you're going to leave all kinds of comments for me, and we can talk about that, and I want to hear that. But I want you to take this part away. Nothing you've ever bought has been bought strictly on education. We may justify it in terms of, hey, once I found out the knowledge or I was educated. Really, that's not true. That's a justification. If I bought something because I was educated on it, what I'm really saying is I learned enough to be able to create value and perceive value in my own mind through that education. It's not education itself, it's the value that I received. If I understand that, now I can then begin to move forward and change some of the ways that I've been being, some of the behaviors and some of the habits of the past, and I can begin to start creating some value. Here's the big deal. If I'm educating, I'm telling. Telling. If I'm creating value, I'm asking. Totally big difference. So the number one takeaway from this is, and you've all heard this before, I'm sure, telling ain't selling. Telling ain't selling. That's the oldest, corniest saying in the book, but you know what? It's totally true. If you're telling somebody, you're not selling them on anything. If you're asking, okay, then you're able to create value. And specifically if you're asking open-ended kinds of questions, what or how kinds of questions, then you're able to create value. So step one, don't tell. Telling ain't selling. Ask. Now, what kinds of things are you asking? You're trying to ask big picture kinds of questions. If we're talking about dentistry, then what you want to know from me, if I'm the patient, what you want to know from me is overall, big picture kinds of things. What's most important to me about my smile? And you're looking to ask me what or how kinds of questions so that I'm going to open up and tell you the things that are emotionally causing me pain, or the things emotionally that I'm trying to get to gain pleasure. For instance, I'm, Sean, what's the most important thing to you about your teeth? Well, I want my teeth white and straight and so forth. Well, I'm curious, what's most important to you about that? Well, I'm doing these silly videos all the time, and I'm standing up in front of the camera, and I'm watching, my producer back here, Casey, who's making all sorts of faces at me and, doing all this. And so anyway, I'm on the camera all the time. And so it's important for me that I'm confident that my smile communicates on the outside who it is that I try to be on the inside. So confidence, right? You're asking questions to be able to help me open up as a patient and tell you those things that are emotionally most important to me in terms of getting out of pain or getting into pleasure. So number one takeaway is no telling. Telling ain't selling. Number two thing is ask questions, or the second part of that of number one is ask questions. The only way you can create value is to ask questions. Second thing is I want to ask what and I want to ask how questions. Those are open-ended kind of questions, and I want to get big picture. I don't want to ask, what brought you in to see us today, right? What is your chief complaint? Oh my gosh, throw that stuff out the window, right? Yes, you're using what or how, but you're asking it in a very small kind of way. You want to ask a big picture kind of way. Overall, what's most important to you about your teeth? And I want to keep asking until I can get those emotional sort of answers. Number 3 thing you want to do is, if you understand that education does not create value, and you understand the number 1 thing, which is I want to ask instead of tell, because I know that telling ain't selling. And I understand that the second thing is I want to ask open-ended questions in a big picture kind of way. Then the third big thing is this. Base the diagnosis on the thing emotionally that's most important to me. In other words, you don't want to base the diagnosis in a bunch of clinical jargon, mesial, distal, buccal, tooth numbers, MODs, and all that kind of stuff, right? You want to break it down. I think the old saying is a 9th grade level, right? Not because your patients are stupid, but because you want to make it as simple and quick and easy to understand as possible. So get rid of the dental lingo and present that clinical diagnosis in terms of what's most important to me emotionally that you found out when you asked those questions. That's the way that ultimately you create value. So those are the 3 steps, right? Number 1, I got to stop telling and start asking. Number 2, I want to ask big picture, global, open-ended kinds of questions. And I want to find out emotionally the pain and the pleasure that the patient is after. And then number 3, I want to present that diagnosis in the context of those things that I just learned. Now, that's the how. But none of that is as important as the first part, which is for me to be great at implementing those how things, I got to be clear in my head. Education means nothing. And so for a lot of people who are listening to this, you're not going to be able to go after those 3 steps until you break this habit of however it is that you go in there because you think you're doing a great job by educating. You know, one of the things that's been recurring, I've been doing this for 20 years. You guys are seeing me look at different cameras here. I'm sorry. I look like I got ADD. Well, I do have ADD. What are we talking about? No, I am looking at these different cameras. That's why you're seeing this. One of the things that happens time and time again over the last 20 years since I've been doing this is whenever I'm interviewing a hygienist or even assistants, or even, frankly, young associates who are coming in as, to work with practices that we work with, I ask them, so I'm curious, what do you think makes you different than most people who do what you do? Time and time and time again. One time I counted it. In a single conversation, I had a hygienist use the word education 9 times. And she just was able to weave it into the conversation. I said, what is the thing that makes you different than most hygienists? Well, I really spend a lot of time educating my patients, and I think the thing that really helps me stand out is because I'm so good at educating my patients. I really put a lot of focus on the education because the education is really where all, the buying comes from and all this. And in dental school, one of the things I learned is most important, hygiene school, one of the things I learned is most important is a serious conscious focus on educating the patient. It's hogwash. It's all hogwash. Education has nothing whatsoever to do with motivation. Value is motivation, and that's what's going to have your patients buy. So, there's really 4 things that we've covered. The first one of those things is you got to get clear in your head, and you got to start challenging some of these habits. Education is not important. What's important is creating value. My patient is not going to buy from me based on all the time I spend educating. They're going to buy from me based on their perception of value. So I want to implement those 3 things, right? Stop telling, start asking. Number 2, ask big picture, global kinds of open-ended questions that start with what or how. And number 3, present my diagnosis within the context of what that patient has just told me is most important to them, so that they then can see how that's going to get them the emotional value that they were looking for. And that is the way it's done. I can tell you, if this is tough for you, again, it was tough for me. I used to think that education was where the magic comes in. It's only through years of trial and error, even through the courses that I had in college on sales and so forth. They reinforce this, but I don't think I really got it until I got out into the School of Hard Knocks, after school, and really learned that that's actually the case. We deal with this all the time. We're recording our conversations with our clients all the time in terms of their patients' interactions and so forth. If you want to learn more about this, reach out to us. You can find us at thecrabtreegroup.com. We've got a great sales course specifically on treatment acceptance that goes way in depth about how to make this happen. So find us on thecrabtreegroup.com. While you're there, click on YouTube and hit subscribe so that every video we cut will go right to your inbox. I want you to have the best year that you possibly can have, and the only way to do that is to learn this concept about why your patients buy, so you then can implement the steps to be as successful as you can be when it comes to treatment acceptance. And that's what I want for you. It's about the business of your business. I want you to have happier patients, better results, make more money, and I want you to enjoy the ride. I'm Sean Crabtree. I'll see you next Wednesday right here, same time, same channel.